I'm Joe Lample. When I created Growing a Greener World, I had one goal: to tell stories of everyday people, innovators, entrepreneurs, forward-thinking leaders who are all, in ways both big and small, dedicated to organic gardening and farming, lightening our footprint, conserving vital resources, protecting natural habitats, making a tangible difference for us all. They're real, they're passionate, they're all around us. They're the game changers who are literally growing a greener world and inspiring the rest of us to do the same. Growing a greener world, it's more than a movement, it's our mission. In this day of instant information, what are some of your trusted go-to sources for gardening advice and making organic purchases and sustainable practices? I mean, besides this show, of course. But let's face it, with so many products on the shelves to all those items that you can make at home, those options can be overwhelming. Well, one of my trusted go-to sources for all of that information is a guy that studies those topics in depth. Jeff Gillman is Associate Professor in the Department of Horticulture at the University of Minnesota. When he's not writing or teaching or traveling the country speaking, he's usually researching about all of those common household remedies that are often prescribed by self-proclaimed experts without concern for their consequences. Jeff's research and bottom-line assessments has earned him wide respect across the board, from academic peers to many devoted readers and fans.
When I became a professor, ironically enough, it was after I became a professor, I started reading these gardening books, and I read things like baking soda controls powdery mildew, eggshells are great for your tomato plants, mouthwash for black spot. And I asked myself, really? This stuff really works for that? And I started testing it. I started looking at it as an academic, and at first it was just kind of out of my own curiosity. But then, over time, I found that people really wanted to know this stuff. And that was awesome. I started writing books on it, and I started doing talks. And you know, I've really been able to carve out a niche for myself, and it's a really fun place to be, fun stuff to do. You know, I am an organic gardener to an extent. I like to use blood meal. I like to use bone meal. I like to use cottonseed meal. These are renewable resources. Will I sometimes use a synthetic? Sometimes, sure. Mostly I'm organic. You see, there's this dichotomy between organic and synthetic, which isn't even true. It's not even real. There are organic things out there that are not great for the environment. Pyrethrum is an insecticide which is natural, and it's an effective insecticide. But you kill beneficials when you use it. You kill bees, you kill ladybugs. So it's not quite as benign as advertising companies might have us think. So whether you're using an organic or synthetic, you've really got to think through what other effects this compound is going to have other than the intended purpose. Synthetics deserve to be maligned. They have a long history of being bad players. I look at DDT, a terrible player environmentally. The thing is, of course, that both organics and synthetics can be bad players. A lot of our synthetics do bad things when they're used incorrectly, but used properly, they can actually, in some cases, be better than the organic choices in terms of the environmental impact, as long as we use them carefully and wisely.
Walk into any garden center, and it's so easy to understand how anyone can become overwhelmed with all their choices, especially as it relates to the fertilizer and chemical aisles. So Jeff, you're the expert here. Help us understand some of our choices, like the fertilizers, especially as it relates to the greenwashing.
Sure. Now, greenwashing happens across pesticides, across fertilizers, and basically what it is, where a company tries to make their product appear environmentally friendly when it's really
not so much, right?
So let's pick up this bag as an example. If we look at the ingredients, we see things like alfalfa meal. Great renewable resource, good choice.
Uh-huh.
But it's also got bat guano, bad choice. Why is it a bad choice? Bat guano is mined from caves in Jamaica, and when it's mined, the ecosystem in those caves is messed up. So bat guano generally not an environmentally smart choice.
Okay.
It's also got rock phosphate. Rock phosphate comes from strip mines in Florida. No, exactly. We're actually going to run out of phosphorus in 50 to 100 years.
Not renewable.
No, we need to be conserving that.
So a better choice would be what?
Well, let's take a look over here. We've got some cottonseed meal. Obviously a renewable resource. It's got plenty of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium for your garden. Cottonseed meal, renewable resource, good choice.
Okay, what else?
Well, here we've got some blood meal.
Yep.
Blood meal is another one that I really like. Nice high nitrogen level.
Yes.
And blood meal helps repel them rabbits.
It's always a good thing. So what I hear you saying, we have lots of choices, especially as it relates to the organic options, but you've said sustainability and renewability a lot, and that seems to be what you key in on.
That's the key. If it's organic, then it's got to have those two traits going for it.
Good tip for what to look for when we're shopping, right? When it comes to organic controls for pests, we can't cover them all, but there's one pest that seems to be universal across the country, and that's slugs. And now we're in Jeff's area of expertise, and Jeff, you've got a few things here to show us. What did you bring us?
Well, let's look at the store-bought organic remedy first. And this is iron phosphate. Iron phosphate is a nice product that you can put out. If you put it out as recommended, it's pretty safe. One thing to remember with the iron phosphate, though, is that if you did leave this out in a big pile or leave this available for your dog, he could get into it and it could poison him. So you do want to be careful with this.
Okay.
It is more safe than a lot of the synthetics, but if you're not careful, you could get poisoning. You want to stay away from that.
Okay.
Now, let's take a look at some homemade cures. Let's take a look at the two most common that I hear about, eggshells and beer. Now, let me ask you, which one of these do you think works and which one doesn't?
Well, I can only speak for myself, but if I were a slug, I would certainly go for the beer over the eggshells.
So would I, and you're actually right on the money. Eggshells tend to be not too effective, and if we look at the slugs down here, we can see them kind of crawling through the eggshells, and this is what we usually find. Slugs make their way through the eggshells pretty comfortably.
Now, the eggshells are supposed to be a barrier, and the theory is it's the sharp edges of the shells that would cut the soft tissue of the slugs, and they would dry out and die, right?
You know, that's the theory, and that actually works for one product called diatomaceous earth. It's actually tiny little shards of glass that come from creatures that lived, centuries ago.
And you can buy that on the shelf at the garden store.
Exactly, and that works great for blocking slugs. Slugs, they prefer not to cross it at all. Eggshells just don't work the same way, and you can see the slugs really cross it without too much problem.
Okay.
The beer, though, is really your best choice as a homemade cure. The best way to use beer, or make a beer trap, is to fill up something like a mason jar most of the way up with your beer, leaving about an inch at the top. What happens is that the slug crawls in, falls in, and drowns in the beer. Now, here's the problem. If you fill it up all the way to the top, what's going to happen is that you have not made a slug trap, you have made a slug pub. What will happen is the slug will actually sit at the top, reach his little head in, drink his fill of beer, and then kind of, meander off in a zigzag pattern, and he ends up okay. You see, beer is not poisonous to slugs. If they don't drown in it, they're not dead. The one thing that you need to remember when making a beer trap is that you have to make it attractive to the slug. The best way to do that is to have the level of the soil about even with the top of the jar. So it's actually good to put this into the ground after you're done. You want to make their trip to the bar an easy one. Let's take a look at a pest that everybody's got a problem with, weeds.
Yes.
So what we're going to look at are two different weed controls, two different herbicides, one natural and one synthetic.
Okay.
Let's look at the synthetic first. This is our most common synthetic out there, glyphosate. It's the active ingredient in Roundup and a whole bunch of other herbicides. So This is what happens 2 days after you spray glyphosate. Look at that. You've got weed death occurring. A few things are green, but mostly these are on the way out.
Right.
Now let's take a look at what happens 2 weeks later.
Everything's wiped out.
Looking at a desert right there.
And everything's dead because it's non-selective, so whatever it touches is going to die. What about the environmental risk of this?
Well, unfortunately, glyphosate does have some environmental risk, not so much the glyphosate itself, but the products that are mixed with glyphosate to make it work. When they get into a waterway, a pond, a stream, whatever, they can kill aquatics, which is aquatic insects, aquatic creatures, which is a bad thing. Now let's take a look at the natural pest control, and this is vinegar, about 5% acetic acid. This is after 2 days. Look at that. The burn down is very similar to what you see with the glyphosate.
Right.
Now let's look at 2 weeks.
It's all back.
And that's the problem with something like vinegar. It's a great contact poison. It kills what it hits, but it doesn't hit the roots. Because it doesn't hit the roots, the plant comes back.
So on those toughest weeds like the taprooted dandelions, it certainly is not going to be as effective with them, but couldn't you come back in multiple applications to take them out eventually?
Yes, over a space of 4 or 5 weeks, multiple applications, you will be able to eventually take them out.
But let's talk about the environmental issues with the vinegar too.
If a frog were jumping around in there while you were applying the vinegar, the frog could be badly injured, perhaps even killed. I have killed frogs with vinegar before by accident while trying to control weeds.
Okay, and it's not just frogs though, it's other creatures like frogs.
Any
and
creature in
amphibious.
there. We're talking about an acid. Anything that's in there could be injured by your vinegar application. So the big question is, what happens when you take a pot-bound plant and you put it in the ground and then you wait 5 years?
I would love to know the answer to that question.
Well, I'm going to show you right now. Why don't you put your left hand on that first tree trunk right there?
Okay.
You got it. That particular tree was planted into the ground without any treatment whatsoever to its root system.
So no slicing of the roots or anything else, just right into the ground, covered it up.
Nothing at all. And what do you notice about the roots and the stem?
I noticed that the roots are continuing in that circular pattern and there's no change there, and it doesn't look too healthy to me, other than the fact that it's dead.
Exactly. You got roots pressed up against the stem, and over time what's going to happen is that those roots are going to press against the stem, and over time those roots would have killed that tree.
Okay.
Now this next root system right here, that we sliced before we stuck it in the ground. And what differences do you see?
Not much. It's still got the circular pattern of the roots, and it just really doesn't look any different. So I can see that this is probably on its way to another early demise if it were left in the ground.
You're exactly right. So then let's move on to the box cut. And the box cut is right here. Now there you can see, I mean, what do you see in terms of circling roots?
None. I see that it looks like they're all going out in the direction that they're probably intended to grow. And I would predict that if this tree were still in the ground, it would be healthy.
And you're exactly right. Now, in all fairness, there is one root crossing the stem right here, but in the end, this root probably would not cause a whole lot of damage to the tree. A little bit of compression in one spot, not such a big deal. But this root is probably crossing it all because this tree was planted slightly too deeply. There are two issues that we've got going on here. The first is planting depth, and the second is circling roots. Of the two, planting depth is the one we want to worry about the most, because if you plant at the proper height with the uppermost root, even with or even just above the level of the soil, those roots are never going to have a chance to surround the stem. Okay. Now don't get me wrong, circling roots are bad, they're not a good thing, but they're secondary to that planting depth.
Got it. Okay.
Now, I've got a little quiz for you.
All right.
Let's take a look at this root system right here. A couple of things were done to this root system at planting. Can you guess what they are?
Well, first of all, as far as the planting depth, just the change in the color and the circling roots at the top tells me that this tree was planted too deeply.
Exactly right.
Okay. And then the other thing is the pattern of the roots is still in a circular design, but it looks like they probably tried to slice down the side, but it didn't do much good.
Man, you get an A+. Nice.
From the professor.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah.
Nice work. But you know something, the thing is, if these things were grown a particular way to begin with, we wouldn't even have to worry about circling roots at all in the first place. So Joe, I got a little question for you.
Go for it.
Record players.
Record players.
Black and white TVs.
TVs.
Nursery containers. What do these all have in common?
I don't know. You threw me on the containers.
Okay. Well, they're all 1950s era technology that probably belongs in a museum.
Okay, all right, I'm getting this, but elaborate.
Okay, well, let's take a look at what a tree grown in our current nursery container looks like.
Okay, pull it out.
Pull it out, and we see some circling roots. And this is pretty typical. This tree wouldn't really be considered pot-bound. I mean, they're starting to circle,
right,
but it's really not that bad. Still, I'd rather not plant those circling roots.
And the longer it's in here, the worse it gets.
Absolutely. So the thing is, we have technology today which can help us all but avoid that problem.
Okay,
I mean,
I'm listening.
we can take out 90% of that problem.
Okay.
So, we have root trappers,
okay,
we have super roots, and we have smart pots.
That's these.
These things here. And what these things do is to catch roots as they grow outward. And when they grow outward, they go into these holes and they're air pruned.
Huh.
Same thing happens with the fabric bags here. And when these roots are air pruned, they don't circle anymore. They get caught up, and that's the end of it.
And they just stop at that point.
They just stop at that point.
As opposed to when they hit the surface inside of a plastic container, they're forced to continue to grow, but in that circular pattern.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you know what, let's take a quick look at what that looks like when we open a container. It's a root trapper. This is one we use quite a bit. When I cut down the edge of this container, we'll be able to see the inside of that root ball.
Wow.
And as you can see, nothing but root here. See root tips?
Right.
Beautiful. This is
Okay.
right what I want to see, not a circling root in sight.
Beautiful. But so where's the application here? Because it's not in the homeowner market per se, is it?
No, I mean, if you're a homeowner and you grow some trees, this would be great to use, but really this is for nurseries. And as consumers, what we need to do is we need to go to nurseries and we need to say, look, we want trees without circling roots. And when we tell them that we want containers without circling roots, or trees without circling roots, they're going to grow those trees in containers that prevent them.
And we'll end up with a lot less plastic pots out there too.
Which is going to be a nice thing.
Right. Sometimes it's not just the misleading product labels or the phony marketing advice that are muddying the water for today's gardeners. Sometimes it's the advice we've been given for decades that's now turning out not to be so accurate. For example, you find that perfect planter tree and you bring it home, and when you find that perfect Saturday to plant it, well, we find out what? Sometimes it's root bound, right? Because it spent too much time in that container. So what do? Well, we do what we've always done, and we slice through it to score it to break up that circular pattern, right? Well, thanks to studies by people like Jeff, we now know that that's not even effective. But if that's not effective, what can we do? Well, there's a pruning technique called a box cut. And how do you do it? You get a pruning saw and you basically square off the root ball by making some slices through it. Now, you don't want to go too far into it. Just slice the edges off into a squared up pattern. There we go. And we have one final slice to make, and that's across the bottom. There we go. So there you have it. That's the box cut. You do this and you will totally break up that circular pattern. Plus, if you plant it at the proper depth, which means not too deep, you'll be off to a great start for your tree or shrub.
When you're out there trying to make the most environmentally conscientious decision that you can, be it for a pest control or a fertilizer, you've got to make your choices based on more than whether the product is organic or synthetic. If you look at what that product is going to do to the environment beyond just the immediate impact that you want, and really think about what effect it's going to have out there, that's when you're going to make the right choice.
One of the keys to being a better environmental steward when it comes to gardening is in understanding your options, and that includes knowing how and when those products are most effective. Remember, there are no silver bullets, organic or otherwise. So until then, we've got to keep learning. But you can start right on our website because we have some great links under the show notes for this episode. And the address is the same as our name. It's growingagreenerworld.com. I'm Joe Lample. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here next time for more Growing a Greener World. Action. 3, 2. You walk into any garden center and it's easy to understand how you can quickly become so overwhelmed with all of your choices for just about anything that you want to buy. And Jeff, you are clearly... Your expression really comes to me.
Sorry.
You're like, ooh, look at all
I
this stuff.
was looking up here just kind of.